In the early days of 1981, Brookfield, Connecticut was celebrating its 193rd year without a homicide when the streak was broken. Early in the evening of February 16th, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, all of 19 years old, walked up to his landlord, Alan Bono, and stabbed him multiple times with a pocket knife. Bono would die a few hours later in the hospital. Johnson was picked up by police some 2 miles away from the murder scene. 8 months later, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson stood before a jury of his peers and planned to submit a plea of not guilty by virtue of possession. It all started on July 3rd of 1980, when David Glatzel, at the time just 11 years old, woke up screaming about a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hoofs. The Beast Man warned David to beware. David wasn't the kind of kid who watched scary movies, and he sure wasn't one to make up stories or have such vivid nightmares. This one really shook the kid. His whole demeanor changed. The once happy-go-lucky lad became quiet and nervous. David's sister Debbie asked her fiance to stay with the family for a while to see if he could help David out of this funk. That fiance, as I'm sure you guessed, was Arnie. Things didn't get better. David had more nightmares of the Beastman, who promised to take the boy's soul. Odd scratches and bruises began to appear on David, the injuries seeming to happen while David slept. Odd noises came from the attic, but Arnie couldn't find any reasonable answer for them. Worst of all, David began to see the Beastman while he was awake, claiming that the monster would appear as an old man with a white beard, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans. With nowhere else to go, the Glatzel family turned to their church. A priest came to the home and blessed it, which seemed to do little more than piss off the Beastman. The sounds in the attic became louder. David's dreams and daytime visions increased. David began to hiss at his family and speak in multiple voices. He started to quote Paradise Lost, a book that I don't think many 11-year-olds read. During the night, someone would have to stay up and watch David, who would wake up every 30 minutes, sometimes having seizures. To put it bluntly, things really sucked for the Glatzels. Unsure of what to do, the priest had reached out to a kindly couple who had helped out in the past, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens took the short trip from Monroe to Brookfield so that Ed could speak with David. As the ex-cop turned demonologist interviewed the boy, Lorraine watched. She would later explain what she saw to People magazine. While Ed interviewed the boy, I saw a black misty form next to him, which told me we were dealing with something of a negative nature. Soon the child was complaining that invisible hands were choking him, and there were red marks on him. He said that he had the feeling of being hit. It became clear to the Warrens that David was possessed. There was some question as to what happened next. While the Diocese of Bridgeport admits that they did investigate the Glatzel case, they have never spoken to more than that. According to Lorraine, the Warrens, along with 4 other priests, held 3 exorcisms to free David from the hold of 43 demons. During one of the exorcisms, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson made what would be a tragic choice. He taunted the demons within David, going so far as to claim that the monsters were too frightened to even try and enter him. When the exorcism was over, the Warrens called the Brookfield police and suggested that they keep an eye on Arnie. As November 1980 started, things seemed okay. David's parents took him to a psychiatrist and their family physician. David was, according to the doctors, a normal kid with a slight learning disability, though he still had trouble sleeping. Debbie and Arnie moved into their own apartment, rented out by Alan Bono. But Arnie had changed. In all his 19 years, Arnie had never gotten into trouble. He was the proverbial good guy. When money was tight, he dropped out of high school to get a full-time job and help his mom out. He even bought his mom a car, an $80 junker so she wouldn't have to walk to and from work. Arnie was well-liked and hard-working all the way up to that day. That day, he challenged whatever was inside David. According to Debbie, Arnie would go into trances where he would growl at nothing and claim to see the Beastman. When he would come out of the trances, Arnie wouldn't remember any of it. Arnie started to get into trouble with the police. Nothing that crazy, but certainly out of usual for the guy. Then came February 16th, 1981. Arnie called out of work, choosing instead to spend it with Debbie and his sister Wanda at their job at a kennel. Debbie's cousin Mary was also spending the day at the kennel. It was President's Day and the school was closed. As the gang goofed about at the kennel, playing with what I can only imagine was only an endless parade of cute puppies, Alan Bono showed up and took them all out to lunch at a local bar, a perfect place to bring a 9-year-old. Depending on which reports you read, either both Arnie and Alan were drinking a serious amount of booze for lunch, or just Alan was. Either way, when everyone returned to the kennel, there was an uneasiness. An argument between Arnie and Alan broke out. Arnie started to growl and hiss. Debbie fared the worst and tried to get Wanda and Mary out of the room. Alan was faster. He grabbed Mary and refused to let go. That was when Arnie pulled out the knife and stabbed Alan Bono in the stomach, pulling the knife up and creating an incision reaching Alan's heart. Arnie then stabbed Alan Bono a few more times before leaving the scene. Martin Minella, Arnie's lawyer, was the one who came up with the idea of pleading not guilty by virtue of possession. Minella found 2 cases in England where demonic possession was used as a plea, though neither of those cases ever went to trial. Still, Minella figured if it was good enough for the Brits, why not give it a try here in the States? Well, it didn't work. The judge refused to accept the plea. The judge stated that there was no way to show evidence of a possession at all. With that plea thrown out of the window, Minella and Arnie Johnson went with what would have been my first choice for a plea: self-defense. After all, Bono had taken the 9-year-old Mary and refused to let her go. All the same, Minella hadn't planned on using that defense, and I suppose it showed in the courtroom. The jury found Arnie Johnson guilty of first-degree manslaughter, giving Johnson a 10 to 20-year sentence, though he only served 5. Arnie and Debbie married after he was released, and are still together today. The trial was quite a sensation in 1981, leading to a made-for-TV movie called The Demon Hunter Case, starring Kevin Bacon and Andy Griffith, and even a book, The Devil in Connecticut. Well, was David Glatzel possessed by 43 demons? Did one of them enter Arnie Cheyenne Johnson? I don't know. But what I do know is that whatever did happen, demons or not, there was an evilness that exists in this story. A little boy who was tormented by something. A young man who found himself overcome with anger. A middle-aged man who couldn't control his drinking. And a death that could have easily been avoided. Maybe there was a possession in this story. At least one man was taken by what old-timers used to call the demon drink. From 1974 to 1987, the Smurls claimed they were at the mercy of ghosts. Their story involves journalists, demonologists, and the Roman Catholic Church. It caught the attention of the media, which resulted in several published articles, a book, a TV movie, and even attracted infamous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. This is the Smurls' story. After flood damage forced them from their home, Janet and Jack Smurl, along with their young daughters and Jack's parents, moved into a Chase Street duplex in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. A bit of a fixer-upper, they put their efforts into repainting, retooling, and repairs. It was at this time that the eerie activity began. Initially, the episodes were benign. Tools went missing, then reappeared. Old wall stains seeped through fresh coats of paint. Then the kitchen appliances caught fire, even though they were unplugged, and awful odors overwhelmed the house, only to disperse moments later. Still, the Smurls family soldiered on. Jack was promoted at his job and doubled as his daughter's softball team coach. Janet became pregnant and helped organize an anti-drunk driving group at the local high school. The girls excelled in their studies and the in-laws were happy, but like all good ghost stories, their luck was about to change. Soon, the Smurls were struggling to make ends meet. Mary, Jack's mother, even suffered a heart attack. The ghostly visits, meanwhile, intensified. Mary and Janet claimed to have perceived voices that sounded like one another. Janet thought she heard her mother-in-law calling her name, While Mary thought she heard Janet and Jack in the throes of an argument laden with expletives, Janet said she was visited in the dead of night by an evil force that molested her in her sleep. Then Jack joined the club. Lying in bed with Janet, he heard someone whispering, a young woman it seemed. When he turned to face his wife, he watched the shadowy figure run up her leg. After that night, life in the Smurl house grew darker. A light fixture fell from the ceiling, cutting one of the daughters on impact. The family dog was thrown against the wall. Janet said she was picked up by an invisible presence dangling some 6 feet in the air, and then tossed across the room. Jack claimed a succubus entered the living room and raped him while a baseball game played on the TV. Even neighbors reported hearing screams from the house while the family was out. Terrified, the Smurls contacted self-taught demonologist duo, the Warrens. After inspecting the house, Lorraine Warren, a clairvoyant with several well-known paranormal investigations under her belt, concluded that the Smurls shared a home with 4 spirits: a harmless elderly woman, a young and possibly violent girl, a man who suffered and died in the home, and a demon that used the 3 other spirits to destroy the Smurl family. Group prayer sessions and exorcisms were conducted, yet the attacks continued. So the Smurls took their stories public in hopes that someone might hear of their plight and know how to help. But the family got more than they bargained for. The press latched on like a malicious spirit themselves and refused to leave. Oddballs camped out in front of their house, cameras flashed, and reporters flooded their lawn. Cars and onlookers cruised by hoping to catch a glimpse of something from another dimension. The Smurl family found themselves at the center of a media circus. Representatives from the Roman Catholic Church in Scranton were uncertain as to what might be causing the activity. Multiple different priests visited the Smurls to bless their home. They reportedly encountered no harmful activity while on the property. In 1986, an area priest actually moved into the household, hoping to witness the demonic forces firsthand. But nothing stirred. After 2 nights without issue, he left. That same year, the Smurls expressed exhaustion over the incessant media scrutiny. In 1987, the family packed up and left their Chase Street duplex. However, supernatural phenomena reportedly followed them into their new home until a church-sanctioned exorcism in 1989 cleared the house of its activity. Since then, experts, priests, television producers, and journalists have all scrutinized the Smurls' story, including journalist Robert Curran and even the Warren themselves. The subsequent owners of the Chase Street duplex say nothing unusual has ever happened in their home. So, were the experiences legitimate, or was it all just a fabrication? Well, only the Smurls truly know. Still, whether a spiritualist or a skeptic, one can't deny the strangeness of their tale. You know, Andy Warhol once said that in the future, everybody will be world famous for 15 minutes. This is certainly true of unassuming carpenter Bill Ramsey. Born and bred in the Essex seaside town of Southend, the first inkling of trouble came when William Ramsey was just 9 years old. Like any normal child, he was outside in his back garden when he began to feel strange. It was deep into one Saturday afternoon in 1952 when an icy blast of frigid cold swept all over him. Perspiration froze on his skin and a foul stench came close to making him vomit. The bewildered youngster only had 2 things on his mind: running away to life on the ocean wave and wolves. By this time, he was close to the garden fence, and only the calls of his mother brought him out to whatever had gripped him. However, something else took complete control over him instead. Intense and pure rage had installed itself firmly within his psyche. Using this and the adrenaline-fueled strength he now possessed, he had uprooted a fence post with the fence still attached and was swinging it like a club. Not even his parents could easily remove the post with their bare hands. What the young child did next made both of his parents flee back into the relative safety of their home, leaving Bill isolated outside. Bill Ramsey placed the wire meshing into his mouth and began gnawing at it. The cold sensation returned and a low growl emanated from deep within him. Both his parents remained inside the house until it was apparent that their son had calmed down considerably. For nearly 15 years after that terrifying incident, nothing even remotely similar happened in the life of Bill Ramsey. He had grown up, got married, and became a doting father of 3. The first 2 years of his marriage, though, were plagued by nightmares. Each dream was the same, and the results ended up identical as well. Ramsey always awoke in a cold sweat and was overwhelmed by feelings of dread and unease. In his dream, he was always a few steps behind his wife, who would then turn to face him and run away in extreme terror. It was only in 1967 that these dreams ended. 18 months on, and Bill woke one night to hear what he thought was the panting of a wild animal somewhere inside of the bedroom. He was correct. It was Bill himself. Once again, there was a lull in activity for approximately 15 years. It was now 1983 and Bill was out with some friends at a local pub. After several drinks, Bill began to feel the same icy chills that first manifested much earlier in his life. He made an excuse and headed to the lavatory. Once there, he checked himself in the mirror and saw a wolf looking back at him. This was just a precursor as to what was to happen on their way home. In the car ride home, and without any warning, Bill began to growl and immediately turned to his fellow passenger. Both hands twisted into claws, and Ramsey tried to bite the leg of his friend. The designated driver didn't panic. He brought the car to a stop and made attempts to get the raging Bill out of the back of the car. It still took several minutes and quite a bit of effort to finally get Bill out of the car. By now, the frenzy had dissipated. Worse was to come though, but not for another 18 months. Shortly before Christmas 1983, Bill begins to suffer from chest pains and thoughts immediately turned to a possible heart attack. Bill checked himself into the emergency room of the local hospital and was halfway through a blood pressure examination when he sank his teeth into the arm of the nurse and ran through the ward as a man possessed. Witnesses would later reveal that Bill had hunched shoulders and both hands had curled into talons or claws and bared lips just like a rabid animal. Anyone that dared approach was knocked down easily with almost superhuman strength. It took quite a few people working as a team to finally subdue the rampaging man. A police officer managed to place handcuffs around Ramsey's wrists, but still, that was not sufficient. A tranquilizer finally put an end to the outburst. The following morning, this tranquilizer had worn off, and so did the original transformation. After a hearty breakfast, the attending doctor listened to the whole story and recommended that Bill remains under observation. However, he was a voluntary patient and was fully entitled to check himself out. Bill did so, but was back within the span of 2 months. In January 1984, Bill had just finished a visit to his mother when he began to feel an attack coming on. He made it to the same hospital on the same terms of his previous visit. The attending nurse was alone with Ramsey in the emergency room and feared for her life once she told Ramsey that she was going to find a doctor. Ramsey threw to one side and lunged for an orderly. By chance, 4 police officers entered the hospital and immediately circled Ramsey. The officers and Ramsey had a standoff for a few seconds until Ramsey began snarling and growling at all 4. The policemen advanced on Ramsey, who strongly defended himself. One of the 4 police officers suffered wounds so severe that he ended up in the hospital for another 4 days. All 4 managed to handcuff Ramsey again. The short walk to the waiting squad car went off without incident as Ramsey had apparently regained his faculties. When he arrived at the local police station, they immediately summoned the police surgeon. Ramsey considered the suggestion of checking himself into a mental institution but decided against it, citing the stigma that he might feel in the days to follow. Since he was clearly in control and rational, Ramsey was released. In the summer of 1987, he was back at the police station. This time, however, he was much more public-spirited. Having made a citizen's arrest to a local teenage prostitute, he drove her to the station. The second that he parked his car, she fled into the station. Ramsey once again felt the now familiar sensations surging from the middle of his chest, just as a burly policeman approached the car, considerably bigger than Ramsey, started to question him and made the big mistake of gently touching Ramsey's arm. The wolf within him took immediate hold of Ramsey, and the officer was thrown to the ground and was having the life choked out of him up until he finally came. Ramsey was so wild that it took a dozen policemen to hold him down and 2 injections to finally restrain him. For the next 10 days, countless MRIs, X-rays, and psychiatric tests could not determine what was wrong with Ramsey. Clearly, there was some issue that needed resolving. Nobody should really switch from mild-mannered rationale to rampaging berserker and back again in the space of a few minutes unless there is something seriously wrong. One thing that went in Bill's favor was the visit to London of American demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren. Bill's story appeared on a television show at the time of their stay. Lorraine immediately considered that Bill was being possessed and got in touch with the Southend On-Sea police station. After dialogue on both sides, the Warrens obtained the opportunity to talk to the Ramseys. The Warrens negotiated with Bill Ramsey and finally convinced him to come to their church in Connecticut and undergo an exorcism with their own specialist, Bishop Robert McKenna. Bill relented and made the trip with his wife in 1989. A tabloid newspaper, The People, sponsored the trip. The night before the exorcism was due to take place, Ramsey tried to strangle his wife while she slept. When the exorcism actually began, Bill was not at all impressed. The service was being conducted in Latin, and for half an hour nothing happened. Bill then took on an entirely different appearance. His face contorted and both hands formed claws. McKenna commanded the demon to leave. The full force of werewolf fury descended on McKenna one time and then disappeared for good. The whole event was recorded on film. Bill Ramsey last appeared in public in 1992 when he updated his progress. Just before his exorcism, the transformations were increasing in both frequency and seriousness. Since that time, there have been no incidents recorded. No one has been rampaging uncontrollably through the streets of Southend-on-Sea in almost 15 years now. But Bill Ramsey has been quiet for just as long as that before. Hey everyone, it's The Laughing Corpse. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed these stories. Please, if you'd like to hear more, make sure and hit that subscribe button and also that notification bell. It really helps me out. Also, if you look in the description box below, you'll find my email address. If you have any stories of your own, don't hesitate to send them to me, as it'll help me create more videos in the future. Until next time.